If you will turn to the Old Testament book of Obadiah, we left off right around verse 11. And it was jokingly said this morning that the last 10 chapters of this book are great. Y'all figure that out when you figure it out. This has been a good study, at least it has been for me. I hope it has been for you to open up the minor prophets. And we're here in the book of Obadiah. This is the first book that we're studying due to the approximate dating we're giving it. But we left off in verses 10 and 11, and I just want to read verse 10 to get our minds back where we needed to be about Edom here. Verse 10 in the book of Obadiah says, "For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever and ever." And when we ended with verse 11 to explain this to us, "In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, and the day that strangers carried away captives his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them." You remember we ended this particular study last week talking about the fact that Edom had put itself up in a stronghold. And Edom was very proud of how strong it was, of how protected it was. It was very proud of what they had done for themselves. And we made a lot of correlations last week about how we can have those same type attitudes, how we can be so proud of what we've done. We can look at all the buildings that we have built. We can look at all of these things, but Edom missed the fact that their own brethren were hurting and needed them, but yet verse 11 says they stood on the other side. In other words, they knew there was a need, especially here an extreme need, and they stood back and watched as their brethren were suffering. The Edomites here in this scene is described as those who smote Judah, and Obadiah is describing them as those who needed to be rebuked. You look at verse 12. This is where we pick up today. "But thou shouldst not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldst thou rejoice over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldst thou spoken proudly in the day of distress." Well, that makes it worse, doesn't it? It's not just that they stood on the other side and watched their very family be destroyed, carried away into captivity, verse 11. Strangers entering the gates to occupy, to take over the land. But it's verse 12. It's not just that they looked, it's that they rejoiced. Is it possible for us, if we're going to make a modern application of this passage, is it possible for us to rejoice when others are in sorrow? We won't admit that, most likely. But is that possible? I think it is. I think it's very easy for us to look at someone and say, that's good. Here Edom looking at Judah, and they rejoiced. And look what they rejoiced at. They rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Also, they not only rejoiced, but they were very verbal about it. They spoke proudly in the day of distress, verse 12. It's not just that they were happy that Judah was destroyed. It's that they boasted that Judah was destroyed, and guess who wasn't? Good old protected Edom. We hewed ourselves in the rock, and we're like eagles. Remember the first 10 verses described. Nothing can catch us. Nothing can take us down. Look at what we've done. Look at our own brethren. They can't even make it. Well, that's a statement that we make a lot of times, isn't it? But what do we think about that statement? What goes around comes around. Well, we like to say it. But what do we think about what goes around comes around? You reap what you sow, yeah. You reap what you sow. Well, let me ask you this question. Should we be happy that others reap what they sow? No, that's right. That's right. Then we become like Edom, don't we? They were so excited that Judah was being taken down, and they were strong. Verse 13, let's make it worse. Edom, let's make it worse. "Thou shouldst not have entered into the gate of thy people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldst not have looked over their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity." What's Edom doing? Well, they think they're better, it seems, but In the midst of this great siege of Jerusalem, where are the Edomites? Well, they're not just only looking down at Judah, they're in their gates. And I think the ending of verse 13 makes it worse. Not only have you, A, went into the gates, verse 13, and did nothing. Not only, B, in verse 13, did you look on their afflictions and do nothing, but you took their possessions. While they were being slaughtered, while they were being carried away, what was Edom concerned about? Riches. Spoils of war that were not theirs. Greed. That's a good way to look at it. Greed. To make it worse, Edom, verse 14, neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those that did escape. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. I agree. That's right. That's right. That's the age-old question, why do good things happen to bad people? Remember, Jesus even told his disciples that the people on this earth that are living it up, they have their reward. Did Edom have its reward? Oh, it took it right out of Judah, didn't it? But I think what makes it worse, it's not that they looked down upon this. It's not that they laughed and rejoiced at their calamity. It's not that they boasted of the calamity. It's not that they took spoils from their very own brethren. That's right. Remember those alliances, verses 1 through 9, that Edom had made, those treaties? Here it is. Evidently, they'd made some treaty with Babylon because when Judah was being overthrown, where were the Edomites? Running the people into the captives' hands. Now, you think about this for a minute. Who is Judah and who is Edom? What's their connection? They're brethren. You think about that. Would we deliver, and I'm going to use some biblical language to make the illustration, would we deliver another congregation into the hands of Satan? Well, the answer immediately is no, we would never do that. But don't we possess that capability? Don't we possess that capability? Don't we possess the capability to cut off those who are trying to escape? Verse 14, I'm going to make the illustration to us. Sin. Can't we make it hard for people to repent? There's an illustration I think that's being made here, is that we have a lot to do with our brethren. We have a lot to do with our brethren. And we can make a lot of things go right, or we can make a lot of things go wrong. Where was Edom at here? Oh, they lined up with the wrong crew. So not only did they take their family's things in the day of their calamity, verse 13, they stood in the crossway, and here's the way to look at the crossway. It was the way of escape. There's one way out, and where was Edom? Just pushing them back in. Pushing them back in. But not only that, those that escaped, the end of verse 14, they brought them back. That's hard for us to imagine because we've never seen the scenes of war in our lifetimes on American soil, have we? We've never seen a day of calamity as being described here. We've never seen a siege of war. But just imagine this for a minute. We can make a country application of this. Would we turn our very own countrymen to the enemy? That's the application that's being made here. And they did all of this, and I love how it describes it, not because of that's how it describes it, because it gives the impact. The day of calamity, the day of distress. Anybody ever been stressed? You ever been Obadiah 14 stressed? Then verse 15, this kind of rounds up this area. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen, as thou hast done, and it shall be done unto thee. Thy own reward shall be upon thy own head. Why does he call it a reward? Yeah, this is that same principle that's being described as we've already described. You reap what you sow. Now, when the Lord says you reap what you sow, is that positive or negative? In verse 15, to Edom. I don't want that proclamation from the Lord, do you? Because when the Lord speaks, it is true. It's not like when we speak. Sometimes we speak and we think something's going to happen.
All of this calamity that's being discussed is the judgment of God.
Yes, that's right.
And so, as for us today, in looking at this and looking at this world that we live in, it's very easy for the church to stand aloof and look and going, you know what, one of these days you're all going to burn.
That's right.
And take some sort of self-satisfaction in that, and that's what we are also being warned against.
Yes.
Even in the midst of God's righteous judgment, our position is to empathize and sympathize and reach out to people.
That's right. That's right. But many times, how many times are we like Edom?
I think this shows that lack of brotherly love is not pleasing to God.
I think so too. There's two ways to look at it, I think, when you're talking about brotherly love. Number one, I think there's brethren love, brotherly love. But number two, I think there is humanity love. What do we have in connection with the rest of the people of this world? Man, we've got everything in connection with these people. That's right, made in the image of God. But we fail to see that sometimes, don't we? And that has to do some with the way most countries work. You have a social security number, and that's your number. And you're a number, and that's kind of how sometimes we see ourselves. And we take attendances, and I've often said I'm going to change that from saying attendance to souls. Because we just see numbers, we just see data instead of the image of God. You ever thought about that? What are you? You're the image of God. Now think about this. What are the people on the other side of the world? Same thing. Let me make this illustration because I think this one's pointed in our country right now. What's a Democrat in comparison to a Republican? They're made in the image of God, aren't they? We struggle with that because we pick sides. That was Edom. Edom picked sides. Edom didn't pick the Lord's side. Whose side are we on? Is it the Lord's or is it the United States? Is it the Lord's or is it East Hills? I think that's a big problem for modern Christianity. We pick congregationally. And we fail to recognize that we may be picking wrong. I think there's humanity, brotherly love, and Christianity, brotherly love, both of which I think are important.
We have a responsibility to all that are lost.
That's right. That's right. I think the great comparison could be made to this of those that are lost, especially talking about the judgment of God. That's what this is. Why was Judah being taken captive? Let me ask you this way. Whose fault was it? Was it God's fault? It was Judah's fault, wasn't it?
Not believing in the Lord, not doing what the Lord wants them to do, and other things that the Lord commands.
Now, whose fault is it that Edom's in trouble? Edom. Now, listen to this one. Whose fault is it when we're in trouble? Somebody else's. That's how we live. Don't our children do that? They get in trouble and they cry for the one that they don't think's going to get them. If I get onto Charlie, do you know what the first word out of his mouth is? Mommy. He thinks he's got an end there. How many times is that what we do? It wasn't me. It was us. It was Edom. It was Judah. And this proclamation in verse 15, listen to the first phrase of this. For the day of the who? For the day of the Lord. This is not Babylon's day. Boy, you know they thought they were high and mighty, don't you? They are taking over Judah, God's people. And you know they knew they were God's people. The world knew who Judah was, just as much as the world knew who Edom was. Just as much as the world knows who Christians are. Who do we belong to? God. The world knows that. And he says, for the day of the Lord is near upon, now listen to this, all the heathen. What do you think the Lord is calling Edom here? A heathen. A heathen. This is the oft-stated principle of divine law. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thy own head. Whose fault is it, Edom? The Lord says it's Edom's fault. This is the same principle laid down in Galatians chapter 6, 7 through 10. And this precept applies to individuals, nations, and I'll even make the application that this principle applies to congregations. Groups of people, groups of folks. In time or in eternity, or both time and eternity, this will be true. Their day is up. Verses 15 through 21 is the warnings about the day of the Lord. Not only is God going to tell them, this is what you have done that was against me, against your own brethren, but he's going to warn them, here's the day that's coming. This is what we pick up with in verse 16. Verse 16, for as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen then drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. Edom had profaned God's mountain. They had done this, number one, by literally holding, according to history, drunken feasts there. Does God care about our associations? I think he does. I think you know he does. Zion, or Edom here, correct that, Edom had associated with the world. And what happened to that association? It became a reality, didn't it? Edom reached out to all these treaties of the world. They started becoming like the world. And before they knew it, they were acting like the world. You think Babylon didn't rejoice that Judah had fallen? Oh, you know they did. You think Babylon did not go through and get the spoils of war? You know they did. You think Babylon didn't work to bring the captives back who fled away? You know they did. Yes, there is a reference here, I believe, also to God's wrath. And I believe that verses 15 and 16 can't be separated. For all the heathen. Verse 16, they're going to come into this mountain and it's going to be as if they were not there. What's that mean? No one's going to survive as a heathen. No one's going to survive as a heathen. Here's what he's saying. No one's going to stand up against me. There's the impact here that God is stating. Verse 17 here is the impressive part about this. But upon Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. What's God saying? You're not going to win in what you've ployed. This is not going to work. This is not going to be a long-term thing. In contrast to your destruction is going to be Zion, which is going to be a house of salvation, which is going to be a reference of truth here. That's right. I think there's a spiritual application made here too, isn't there? Spiritual application to be made.
If you've ever noticed throughout the entire Bible, God's given warnings for this, warnings for that, numerous of times, but man just acts like he don't care.
You know, man does that. And we see that every day. But let me ask this question because I think it's hard. It's definitely hard to answer. How many times do we act like we don't care? We put on our suits of righteousness. John Deeberry says you sit on pews of comfort. What are we doing? What are we doing as the world, the heathen, is lost? Do we sit in pews of comfort? Or do we walk on the road less traveled? Are we much like Edom as we sit back and watch the world be destroyed? Or are we, as verse 17, the spiritual Zion of deliverance? There's a spiritual application to be made here, especially when you tie Isaiah 2:2 and Micah 4:2 and Luke chapter 1, verse 33. The kingdom of the Lord is going to be established for how long? Forever. And here's a reality of that. You're either going to be a part of the kingdom and a part of the kingdom work, or you're going to be the heathen. Now, I know that's a hard saying to hear, but remember verse 15, for the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen, all of those who stand up against me. We're either going to stand with the Lord and for the Lord and by the Lord, or we're going to stand against Him. And we need to check ourselves to make sure we're standing with Him. Look at verse 18. This is the continuation of this, something they could look forward to. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining in the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken it. What's the impact? What's the most important thing of verse 18? What's the most important phrase of verse 18? For the Lord has spoken it. This is one of those passages that I think we get lost in some of the wording that's happening here, in some of what I call the history of the passage. In Jacob and Joseph, we get caught up in that. What's the point? Edom will fall. Why? Because the Lord spoke it. Now, hasn't the Lord spoke something of us? You think about this for a minute. There's going to be a judgment day, and on that day, what two groups of people are going to be divided? Well, sheep and goats. What does that mean? That's a day the Lord has spoken it. That's a sure day, isn't it? Just as Edom fell, will be the fall of man. You often hear people talk about the fall of man. The true fall of man will be in the day of judgment, because the Lord has spoken it. The Lord has spoken it.
I believe the day of judgment is not going to be a very happy picture.
Depends on where you sit. But as we look at it, we often look at the day of judgment as, I'll say it this way, for the Christian, we have nothing to fear. There's nothing to fear about the day of judgment. For the heathen, I'm choosing that word because of verse 15, for all the heathen shall fall. The heathen has everything to fear. But check this reality. For this very moment, that day's not here. I can't guarantee you in the future. So my statement is already void. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Repeat that, please. That's right. Now is the time. Matter of fact, this morning's sermon, the time is now. You'll see what I mean when we get there. I'll not give that away. Verse 19 continues on. The Lord has spoken at verse 18. Verse 19, and if they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and they of the plains of the Philistines, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria, and Benjamin shall pass Gilead, add verse 20 to it, and the captivity of the host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, even into Zephirite, and the captivity of Jerusalem. What's the depiction that's happening here? Even if the world tries to kilter and try to change history, even if the world mobilizes to try to change things, didn't Babylon mobilize to take down Judah? Won't they continue to try to take down the rest of the world and make that great empire they were trying to make? We don't look at Babylon very often as the nation that I think we should look at it. Their whole idea was world domination. That's what they wanted. And they would do anything they had to do to get it. Now let's make this application for just a minute. How many times in history have groups of people, nations, been concerned about world domination? In which generation did that not exist? That's right. Isn't that still happening today? Aren't nations rallying, making treaties, trying to be the world dominating power? That's right. That's right. But let me make this illustration to us, because I think this is pertinent. Does God need the United States? We need God. The United States needs God. Let me ask you another pointed question. I think it's applicable here. Edom just knew that there was nothing that was going to destroy them. The Lord promised that the church would always be, didn't he? So what does that mean? The church will always be. Now let me ask you this question. You're not going to like this question, but let me ask you this question. Did the Lord promise that the church would always be at 509 East Madison Street? And how many times do we live like the Lord promised that? It's not just us. This is an American problem. I call it that. It's an American problem. It's not really a world problem. We are so proud of what we've done. That's right, we do. We take our life for granted. We are a nation that's a house divided. But let me ask you this question now. All of these nations throughout history have been trying to realign themselves to dominate the world. When are Christians going to align themselves to dominate the world? I don't mean rule the world, I mean convert the world. That truly is what would rule the world, wouldn't it? What would it look like if the entire world were Christians?
I think what happened with so many denominations thinking different ideas.
Simple illustration.
But not every denomination goes by that book.
I know. But we do. And what was the command for us to do? How far were we supposed to take the gospel? Seems like the Lord told us that somewhere, didn't he? But how many times are we like Edom and we watch maybe the nations align themselves to dominate the world? Or maybe we watch, since you brought this up, the other religions of the world aligning themselves to dominate the world. Is there a religion that's trying to dominate the world right now? What's its name? Okay. Are they trying to dominate the world? Why aren't we? Now, I know we're a group of 207 billion, getting close to 8 billion now. I know. But why aren't we? Lord's body's all over the world, literally. Why aren't we? I think so. And I think that was Edom's problem. They were secure. They were comfortable. They were happy where they were. They were satisfied with their lives. Isn't that how we live? It's going to come to a shock to you, but I'm not satisfied. Are you? You got a neighbor? Hadn't found the right neighbor. Remember, the Lord made the illustration with a man who was stripped of his possessions, beaten, and left on the side of the road. And two men of God come by, and one passes by on the other side. One gets close enough to peer into this man's life. And then what we would call a heathen man comes by. And that's right. You just look around. Just look around. It's everywhere. We're going to talk about that in our sermon this morning, so we got to quit that. Give that up. We'll get there. But here in this particular scene, from verse 18 down to verse 20, it's a graphic statement that the prophetic prediction of the house of Jacob and the house of Joseph would be as a flame, and the house of Esau would be the stubble. They would be that which was consumed with what the Lord had been describing here. The former would consume the latter. The house of Jacob is a reference to the southern tribes, and Joseph is a reference to the northern tribes. And these two segments of the divided kingdom would be united again in the scenes as the prophet depicts. I know the minor prophets are short, and I know we have one more passage to look at in this book, but what's the point of the minor prophets? We're going to ask this at the end of every book. What is the point of Obadiah? What's the point? That's right. That's right. I definitely think, I'm going to get to yours, I definitely think Romans 15:4 is applicable. For whatsoever is written aforetime, written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of Scripture might have hope. But I think you're dead on it right there. God's serious. Yeah.
I think a lot of mankind don't want to take the Lord serious.
I think so, but this morning I don't want to make application to the world. I want to make application to you and me.
It shows us that man is helpless against the wrath of God.
That's right. That's right. And I think it also teaches us, as we'll move into the next book here in just a little bit, so we probably won't make it today. But I think it also shows us when God speaks, it will come to pass. That's a good way to look at it. The end is coming. That's right.
In the ebb and flow of history, truth is.
That's right. That's right. In the ebb and flow of history, truth is. Now, let me ask you this question. Did Edom, was it a requirement of Edom to stand back and watch their brethren fall? No. Who made Edom do that? Edom. Was it a requirement of Edom to take the possessions of those who had fallen captive in the day of their calamity? No, they chose to do that themselves. Was it up to Edom to help Babylon funnel the rest of Judah back into their captivity? No, they chose that to themselves. That's right. God in the end will see the truth. You know, God had spoken this warning and it would be done. God had laid it true and it will be true. How long is it going to take for this calamity to fall upon Edom? Well, the answer is we don't really know. We know it happened. I don't know how long the Lord let them be in fear. I don't know if they were in fear. Would you be in fear? If the Lord said your day is coming? Might be a wake-up call, but
The Lord has said that.
that's right. That's right. Now look at verse 21. And Savior shall come upon Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. At the end of days, what's going to matter? That's right. Whether you're standing with the Lord. Where was Edom? Standing with Babylon. They just missed it. I think there's something really impressive happening in verse 21 as well, and I think it's duly to be noted here. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. The Lord's kingdom, who does it belong to? The Lord.
Every kingdom and every existence now belongs to him.
How many times, if we make the spiritual application of this, how many times do we try to make the kingdom ours? That's how it started with Edom. Well, we'll hew ourselves in this rock. And man, ain't nobody going to be able to get us. You remember as you go back to the beginning of this book? Verse 3, the pride of thy heart hath deceived thee. Thou dwellest in the clefts of the rock. Whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Verse 4, thou exaltest thyself as the eagle. And though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. That's right. Their arrogance, pride, and rebellion drove them in. Now, this is a hard question, but are we ever arrogant? I don't ask that because I think you're arrogant, but get the picture here. Are we ever arrogant? Well, the answer is, Are we ever a prideful people? I'm talking about Christians here. I'm not talking about the United States of America. I'm not talking about the citizens of Pulaski. I'm about Christians. We were filled with pride. We are God's people. Was that ever us? I think so. There's a big lesson to learn from Edom, the book of Obadiah. Number one, I think the lesson is let's not get to the point where God has to say, as he said in the book of Revelation, I'm going to remove your candlestick. I'm going to pull myself away from you. I think there's great reference to that in the book of Revelation. I'm going to pull my light from you. What would we be without the light of the Lord? Lost in darkness. And that's what was happening here to the people of Edom. God was pulling himself away from them, and they were going to meet the common problems of the world. It's common in Old Testament prophecies, as you look at verses 19 through 21, to see that the prophet begins with something in the near future and extends his point to the events lying in the distant future. He begins with Israel's return to the land and following their captivity, but quickly moves forward to the time that the Messiah reigns, doesn't he? What kingdom are we under now? Whose kingdom are we in now? One that's being talked about here in Obadiah as the book ends. If the reference is applied here, the deliverers, the judges, the saviors would go forth from Israel, and the saviors would be, I think, as we look at it, as men such as Nehemiah, Ezra, and the prophets. Turning Israel back to the Lord. But I think there's a reference even to the Christian age, don't you? Which may be the most meaningful application here. There was a time in which the Christian age, in which the kingdom would be established, listen to the way I'm going to word this, by the Lord. Who established the Lord's church? The Lord. Who purchased the Lord's church? You start to get the illustration here, don't you? We didn't. But we try to rule it sometimes like Edom tried to rule. Who set Israel into motion? The Lord did. And That's right. That's right. We should remember that. And in this scenes, as we make the application to our day, Christ rules from his throne by the very word of his mouth. And the Saviors also, I think, making this application to the New Testament would be the apostles, prophets, and evangelists of Christ. You remember seeing that as you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as you see the book of Acts unfold. What did they give the apostles for the church? You ever thought about that? What did the apostles give for the church? Ultimately, what did they give? Their lives. Everything. And I think that's the reference that's also being made here, that there will be men who will give everything for the kingdom of the Lord to thrive. Now, the book ends with the kingdom of the Lord, so that means the book ends with you and me. We're in the kingdom of the Lord. I think there's a silent question at the end of the book of Obadiah. Will it happen again? Will we be Edom and be high on our mountain? Let's not be Edom. We're going to pick up next week as we continue to study the book of Joel. So pick up with me next week. So go ahead and be kind of introducing your minds of the book of Joel. And I appreciate you this morning studying with us and having some comments there as we continue to study the minor prophets. I can hear people coming behind us, so we'll go ahead and end. Thank you so much today.